Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Unleash the Power of Diversity for STEM Success, a STEM Equity Pipeline virtual book club with author Debjani Biswas. My name is Greg Nagy, and I'm the Virtual Learning Community Manager from The Ohio State University who provides technical support for the STEM Equity Pipeline project. Before we start the presentation, I would like to go over some housekeeping items for this webinar. This webinar is scheduled to last roughly 1.5 hours and is being recorded in order to view this presentation in its entirety later. The recorded webinar will be available in the next few days on the stemequitypipeline.org website. You will be able to listen to the webinar through your phone or through your computer. You will also be able to interact with the speaker using your phone, your computer microphone, or the chat pod. All the participants' microphones have been automatically muted. Shortly, we will have a resources or a document section open, and you can download the resources from those documents. What you will do is you click on the file and then click the download file button. This will open the file as a link in a different tab in your browser. Today we asked when you want to speak to click your raise hand icon at the top of your Adobe Connect window and one of us will call on you. I would like to start the webinar by introducing Freda Walker, consultant for the STEM Equity Pipeline Project. Freda? Freda, not hearing you.
Good morning or good afternoon. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Whether you're on the East Coast or the West Coast, we welcome you to our virtual book club session. Unleash the Power of Diversity for STEM Success. Greg, are you getting an echo?
Yes, so those of you that might be using this on your phone, make sure that you have your computer speakers muted or mute your phone as well by doing *6 on your phone.
Okay, is that better now?
Seems like
I think so. Okay, here we go. We welcome you to our virtual book club today, Unleash the Power of Diversity for STEM Success. Today, this virtual book club and webinar presentation is funded by NAEP, and you can see our website there, the link to it, and it is also funded by a grant from the National Science Foundation. So we're very happy to be working with the National Science Foundation and appreciate their funding. We'd like to start first by asking you, how did you hear about this webinar? You can see there are a variety of choices, and if you can just start selecting the choice that belongs to you. I can see the results coming in. I think we have a few more people that might be entering their response. As you can see, most people are still learning about this from our STEM Equity Pipeline listserv by email, but we appreciate those who are sharing it with others through colleagues or from another listserv. Okay, let's move to our next slide. I would like to remind you that you can view the archived webinars at our stemequitypipeline.org, and we also are giving a certificate of completion today. It's a little bit different than what we've done in the past. You'll be able to download it today and actually enter your name and have it immediately versus waiting for it to be sent to you. We do have a resource document, and you can see that it's documents to download just underneath the picture of my webcam. And if you click on that, highlight it, you can download that, and it will give you information about our speaker today and different references that are used. So be sure and download that to your computer, and you'll have it. I'd like to remind people that we have a chat function, and you can see that some people have already been greeting each other with a hello down at the bottom here, but we encourage you to use the chat function. If you have questions, you can put them in there during the presentation that the speaker is giving, and I will then ask the speaker those questions, so they'll be recorded. And then we'll also be using the chat function as we have our discussion, our oral discussion. This is our next slide. I'd like to ask who's participating today so that our presenter will know sort of the composition of our group today. Okay, if we can get everybody to begin to respond. Be nice if we can get all 16 responses in. Okay, so those of you who wrote other, could you please indicate in the chat function who you are or your agency? I can see we have some state agency staff, counselors. We always appreciate the counselors that are participating with us, and administrators and a few faculty. So thank you for joining us. Okay, I think we'll move on from the to the next slide. I'd also be interested in knowing if anyone is watching this with you, so we know if there are other people participating. It helps us keep a accurate count. And I can see that people are already answering. Great. I'm going to broadcast the results so that we can, everyone can sort of see that most people are watching by themselves. We have one person that has joined with another person, so thank you. We'll move on to the next slide. I would like to, let's go back one slide. I would like to start by just introducing our speaker, Debjani Biswas, and she is going to share with you some information at the beginning, and then we will have open mic so that we can all share and talk about the ideas and the theories that she presents. So Debjani, I welcome you, and you're on.
Debjani, we don't have your sound right now. I just unmuted you. I still don't hear you.
This. I think when you unmuted me, maybe the microphone went off. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Thank you.
Perfect. The perils of technology. Well, welcome everyone. So excited to have you here. And this is the first book club, and I thank NAEP and I thank the National Science Foundation for your help in getting this book club set up and organized. The first piece is a bio, and I really don't want to go into too much detail about it, except to say that a couple of years ago when I joined NAEP and I wanted to start getting involved with science, technology, engineering, and math, I really thought about diversity and what that means to all of us. And the second bullet, which is the message of kindness, power, and resilience, I believe is very, very important in diversity, especially when we try to get more females and underrepresented groups in STEM careers. I think it's real important that we look out for each other. It's real important that we are strong when there's adversity, because the journey is worthwhile. So I'll focus on that. The other piece is my vision is for a series of books on the same topic, Unleash the Power of Diversity. This first one is on culture. I'm currently working on the second one. It's on gender diversity. It's called Gender Matters. And with that, I've worked in different places all over. And then the other piece of it is as a female chemical engineer, a lot of my learning pertaining to STEM has to do with what it feels like to be one or one of a few within a larger population. And I think that's about all I need to share about my just overall. But first, once again, welcome to today's virtual book club. I'm extremely excited to be able to speak to all of you about this topic. This is a slightly historical moment for me because this is the first book club for Unleash the Power of Diversity. So it means really a lot. You always remember the first of something. What we're going to do today as we go through it is, if we let me, I'm trying to figure out, I want to make sure the way we have it set up is I'm going to discuss some of the key concepts and some of the ideas. But in addition to discussing key concepts and ideas, and we have time at the end for open discussion, is there something else that you would like me to discuss today? Because the topic of diversity is huge. And so is there a specific thing? Let's say you're from a state agency or you're an administrator or a counselor, and there's a specific aspect of diversity. Is there something that you would like me to discuss? I'm going to wait for a moment or two. We have started an open-ended poll where you can type in if there is anything else in addition to covering general concepts from the book around multicultural competence and some of the new frameworks around stereotyping and bias, as well as a toolkit of do's and don'ts for diversity effectiveness. Is there anything else that would help you in being even more successful in your role right now? We have one really good question. How are these frameworks relevant to educators? Yes, I will absolutely talk about that. Excellent. I talked about the next book, so people are listening. This is awesome. The next book on gender, and are there key concepts that would be helpful? Best support of international students who are going into STEM fields in the US. You know, it's really interesting because all these questions, my vision was that each of the books would build upon the original frameworks, the two frameworks, the Diversity Foray and the Five Judgments of this, the first book. So the book on gender, as well as the other following books on generation and style, will all be built upon the same basic frameworks and then add pieces to it. So there won't be any new frameworks as such, just concepts and applications which are different. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and see, using this information to help prepare aspiring students, really good responses and cultural competence shortcuts. Okay, excellent. I will try and cover as many of these as I can. I've made a note to myself. If I don't, then in the open question and answer section, could you please make sure that that is covered as well? And I just wanted to also make sure, while you have a poll open and everything like that, if there is something that you're not able to hear, then please let us know. And so we'll go ahead and get started right now. Okay? Okay. So why do we care? It's one of the questions that you asked. Why do we even care about multicultural competence? Well, one of the things that we want to talk about is, before we even get started with that, we have to make sure that we all are using the word culture in a similar context. In the book, the way that I've defined culture is the way that you behave when no one's looking. And what I mean by that is, it is often very unconscious. It's related to the more traditional definition, which is the shared sets of values, norms, and beliefs. And often culture is associated with a region or a group, sometimes an ethnicity. But really, culture is very deep-seated. And these days, when we talk about multicultural competence, I attended a seminar and a conference in DC recently, and in that, it was multicultural competence. Some of the authors there talked about the culture of gender. So, for example, the culture of women being different from a culture of men. So I encourage you to have a sort of open mind to what the discussion is about culture. There seems to be a little bit of disturbance, so I'm going to try and adjust some things and make sure. Okay. I don't know if everyone has muted their line, but perhaps that's a piece of it. I'm just going to check in with the presenters. Do we need to adjust the sound at this point, or are we okay to keep going?
Johnny, this is Greg. I don't think there's probably anything we can do at this moment, other than if you're listening in on the phone, if you could mute your phone using *6 or a mute on your phone, just in case we're getting any feedback.
Thank you very much. So we're talking about in the book, what is the impact of low versus high cultural competence? There's two pieces of it. And really, this is the question that one of you had asked. How does this relevant to basically STEM success? And how is this relevant to educators in the classroom? The fact is, when we feel different because we are told that we just don't fit in, because we're the only female or we're the only person from an underrepresented population, that we feel marginalized. And when we feel marginalized, then we really feel like because we don't fit in, this may impact our resilience. This may also impact our pipe STEM success, because we'll probably drop out and the rates of dropping out would be higher. And so if we have higher cultural competence, there are two reference points I'd like to give, which is one is that there's the mainstream population. So one of the objectives of the book is to share with people who are in the mainstream population how easy it is to make people feel appreciated and how equally easy it is for people to feel like they've been patronized or marginalized or made to feel small. And essentially, it is a choice if we are in the mainstream population as to whether or not we choose to marginalize someone or to make them feel unique and special because they're different. So that really helps in the classroom. It helps if one is an administrator of a STEM agency, a state agency. It helps if one is a counselor, if one is a teacher. And really, the whole piece of it has to do with whether we appreciate diversity or we consider that diversity is something we have to work through. It's a burden that we have to deal with. So that's kind of one of the pieces. And when people feel valued for being different, those of you that read the book, I call that the orchid effect, valuable and special like an orchid. We find there are huge jumps in their effort. And that applies again in the classroom, because so much when we talk in our STEM curriculum, the professional development curriculum, we talk about the fact that when we try harder, we're not talking about a fixed, kind of a mindset and fixed intelligence. We talk about a growth mindset where if we try harder, we can do much better, but we have to feel like we fit in. It's kind of a piece of that. And then the next piece of it has to do with basically how we link up emotional intelligence. And in that context, I'm going to talk a lot about biases and ask the question, does being different work for us or work against us? And, it's almost as if I paid the person who asked that question $20 and you can pick it up from Greg or from Freda. But really, that is really what I wanted to talk about. How is this relevant to STEM success? Okay, so let's talk about some fundamental concepts. My idea is not to keep talking the whole hour and a half. I get tired of hearing my own voice. And so I'll probably just talk for about 35 minutes total. And then we would like the last 45 minutes to be an open discussion. I really hope, I actually know that some of you have read the book because you've sent me emails about what you liked or what was relevant. So I'm counting on those people who've read the book to start it. But even if you haven't read the book, it's perfectly all right, because we're going to summarize the key concepts. We really want a valuable discussion on how this applies to you and what are the tips that have worked for you. We want this book club to have a lot of best practice sharing as well. So let's look at the fundamental concepts in the book. The premise is that if we understand ourselves and then we understand others, it is very, very helpful to any kind of diversity work that we do. So the first concept that is in the book, which is fundamental, is the Johari window. The Johari window, everybody thinks, is a very exotic thing because it's, the word Johari. It's actually a guy called Joe and a guy called Harry put this concept together. It's used all over the world, and it has to do with the windows of our knowing things about ourselves and things that other people know about us. So you notice that there are 4 quadrants. The first being the known self, which is things that we know about ourselves and others know about us. So for example, you pretty much know based on either my appearance or the things that I say what my age range is. That's known to everybody. And short of doing like plastic surgery or lying about which year I finished college, really that is completely known. But when we move from the pain number one to the hidden self are things that we know think about ourselves that others do not know. This is particularly relevant in the STEM classroom because we have people, several of you spoke about international students, whether they be in a school situation or a community college situation. There are many things that they might feel ashamed about within their culture that they hide. And because of that, it's kind of hard to reach them and even teach them or counsel them. And so this is the hidden self is very critical when we talk about cultural competence. And moving on to quadrant number 3, which is the blind self. This is also critical. These are things that other people know about us that we do not know about ourselves. Again, important in cultural competence because sometimes people move from another population into this new country and they don't even know that they are seen as being different in a negative way because they just don't understand the tools or the basic norms of where they've landed. And then the final one is the unknown self. These are things that neither we nor anybody else knows about us until under times of pressure or stress, this aspect just comes out. So that's the Johari window. As you can see, I'm doing kind of a drive-by because I want to have enough time. This is on the assumption that many of you possibly have seen all this and read the detailed explanations in the book. And then, of course, emotional intelligence is so critical. And that is made up of being aware of ourselves, being able to manage ourselves, being aware of how we fit in with others, and then finally being able to manage specific relationships. Again, very important when we talk about STEM. The administrators, let me ask you, counselors, if a student comes to you that has a terrible attitude, or even teachers, and that person asks for a special favor or some assistance, as humans, of course, we will help everyone, but it's the student that has high emotional intelligence and doesn't make excuses but gives us reasons or openly accepts blame for missing a deadline. That's the person we're more likely to relate to and want to help more. It's just human nature. So these are some of the concepts that talk about how important emotional intelligence is. And then from our aspect, if I, as a counselor, teacher, administrator, am aware of how I'm feeling in a diversity situation, it's much easier for me to manage it. So that's the other piece of it. And of course, I've tried to give references to each of these different concepts, and of course, those are specifically mentioned in the book. Okay? And then when we move on, this is one of my most favorite. I wish I could hear all of you. I know you're muted, but I hope you're all laughing as you see this. I used this one first when the first time before the book was written. I was speaking at London at the International Coach Federation Diversity Conference. It was a global conference with people from 23 countries. And I just stopped for a minute or two just to share this because I just laughed so much. So I hope, even though you're muted, I hope you're laughing. Okay. And so maybe, okay, this is a good thing that my angle may be one of easier for you to see. Thank you, Freda. She sent me a note. So once we move on, let's talk about one of the key concepts, which is the 5 judgments. The 5 judgments, how familiar are you with the 5 judgments? It's a key concept in the book. We'll wait. Okay, excellent. So what we have is about half of you are not at all familiar. And then some of you, about 1/3 of you, are somewhat familiar, and the rest of you are very familiar or didn't vote. Okay, so what we'll do is, at this point, the 5 judgments, I'll do a quick overview of the 5 judgments so that everyone will be familiar with what I'm talking about. The 5 judgments is basically a tool for us to understand how biases and stereotypes occur. So the premise of this, the premise is that every time we walk into the classroom. Every time we're sitting as a counselor in our office, every time a student walks into our classroom or into our office, in every interaction that we have, people consciously or unconsciously make stereotypical judgments about us. And some of these judgments are based on things which are not related to how good we are at that subject or in the classroom or as a teacher. It's not got to do with our professional competence, it's got to do with other things. And if we understand that these judgments are occurring, that helps us to manage diversity more effectively. So let's start with what these judgments are. The first judgment is what I call reputational currency, or your buzz. So what that means is that if you don't know anything about a student, but you know that that student, I'm from India originally, and one of my friend's sons, he's also from India, and he loves art and history and the sciences, but he used to have the hardest time in math classes when he was a little boy, because that was not something that he was naturally very good at. But the moment he walked in, his reputational currency was, you're a little Indian boy, you're probably very good at math. So when he didn't do well, then teachers assumed that perhaps he wasn't trying hard enough, because the reputational currency of his group is that he just wasn't doing that well. So that's the piece of it. And then the next one of it has to do with what I call your physical impact. Physical impact isn't just how attractive you are, it has to do with the type of clothes our students wear. I was doing a session, a NAEP session, at one of the community colleges, local community colleges, and one of the teachers spoke about this little child who came in with very torn clothes and had, just didn't have very good shoes. And at some point, when the little girl knew about the teacher, that the teacher could be trusted, the child actually said that she and her sister shared a pair of shoes. So when she was wearing the shoes, the other little girl was wearing a really torn pair of shoes. Now, if you didn't know this background, you would make some judgments and assumptions based on how that child was dressed. So it's not how they look only, it's got to do with the impression you have of their appearance. Now, when we also talk about later on for STEM success, when we talk about gender diversity, part of physical impact is sort of your posture. Do you have your shoulders sort of back? Do you exude this air of confidence? Do you look like you're in command of the situation? Your physical presence is a huge part of the impression that people have of you. The next judgment that people make is about auditory cues, your sound. Again, when we talk about females in STEM careers, I counsel a lot of females and I also mentor young female engineers. One of the things I say to them is just stop that giggling, that ha ha ha, and the tossing your hair back and messing with your hair and doing all that stuff. The auditory cues of I think, and always apologizing, which is something, again, remember, I'm not saying I like this. I'm just talking about sometimes we have to counsel people who are not aware that their auditory cues are giving a negative impression and causing a judgment which is not aligned with who they are, is reducing their strength or their power. So that our sound, this particular book club, some of you have never experienced me before. Before you start looking at the content, you have subconsciously made some judgments based on how I sound and how I look. It's not a right or a wrong thing, it's just human nature. It's just being aware of it. And then the next thing is differentiating markers. Distinguishing markers is the concept that I will go into a lot of details in the next slide. So essentially, it's the 2 or 3 things that people remember about us. They might be many things. They might be behavioral, they might be physical. I'll talk more about that in the next slide. And then the final piece of it is how good we are at what we're set out to do. Whether the kind of grades that we get in our math exam, how well we do in the chemistry test, whether we are able to complete the biology lab. So that, people are often very, very surprised that the output or the work product is the last of the 5 judgments. I did that so intentionally to highlight the fact that things that are not related to how good we are in our STEM area often will impact whether we are successful or unsuccessful, whether in the classroom or later on as we starting out in a STEM career. So this is one of the key concepts, is the 5 judgments. That is one of the 2 original frameworks from the book. And those of you that asked the question about what will be in the gender diversity book, in that book, we will start with the 5 judgments, but I will focus it, like here I gave a lot of examples which had to do with culture as well as gender. The examples will be more related to advice and tools and tips around the 5 judgments for gender. Okay, so distinguishing markers. Let's talk about distinguishing markers. I'm actually the most pleased with distinguishing markers of all the original frameworks in the book. And really that's because that's the thing that I've received the most feedback and emails and inputs from. And the way that came out, I was thinking about, I have my MBAs in marketing, and we did a lot of work on unique selling proposition in terms of products. What is it that makes a product unique and different? And then I was reading about DNA testing and a lot of things, and they talked about genetic markers. When you combine the 2 of them, then what happens is you come up with this term, which is distinguishing markers. And that means what are the 1, 2, or 3 things that people remember about you when you are not in the room. As soon as they see you, what is it that people remember about you? So when we talk about that, it is really something that people will describe. Now, I have found when I talk about distinguishing markers, a lot of times I said, what are the descriptors that you know? A lot of times we don't know our own distinguishing markers. So that would be, if you're very brave, find someone in your family or someone who is a very close friend and ask them what those 2 or 3 things are that are very different about you. Don't sort of bias them by saying, well, I think if this and this, do you agree? Because out of politeness, they may just agree. Ask them, and you may be surprised that your distinguishing marker is different from what you thought that they would say. Okay, so then let's look at when you use the distinguishing marker, let me give some examples. How you dress may stand out about you in the example I gave of the little girl with very torn clothes. All you may remember about that little girl is that she was wearing those torn shoes. The other thing about a distinguishing marker, it is a behavioral thing. So you may remember, we've all had classrooms where there is one person who always has their hand up and they always want to answer the question. They answer 50% of the questions. That may be their distinguishing marker, and they may not even realize in their enthusiasm that that impacts how other people in the classroom actually view them. The other thing about the distinguishing marker is it could be something to do with how you behave with another person. So if I keep interrupting you, maybe that's the only thing you remember, is that this is the person that doesn't want to hear me speak. A distinguishing marker doesn't have to be positive or negative. It could be neutral. It's just something that you remember about a person. And it is different depending on the situation. If I'm in Saudi Arabia or the Middle East and I'm wearing the burqa, which is that long veil, that they have covering, in Saudi Arabia or the Middle East, it's not a distinguishing marker because all the women around me or many women around me are wearing that. But if I come with that same burqa, which is worn by many Muslim women in the Middle East, and I'm now in Ireland, where I'm the only one wearing the burqa, then the way people will describe me will be, oh, that's the woman who wore the black burqa. So that's kind of what that means. And then the distinguishing marker I mentioned may be something that you don't know about. The purpose of distinguishing markers is to figure out if being different is working for our students or against them. What we want to do in STEM careers is we want to cut out the noise. We want them to have a clear path to being successful at that specific chemistry course, at doing that lab, and not have to worry about whether how they look or how they sound or the group that they come from, if people are biased in the classroom. We just want them to be able to get away from all that and just be successful. So that's why that's very, very important. And then we can counsel and teach our students not just the subjects, the STEM subjects, but we can also teach them how to manage these distinguishing markers and still be authentic. And then that will help them to adapt to the classroom environmental challenges. One of my distinguishing markers, which I know because people give me feedback, is I'm very resilient and I'm very assertive. When I was 15, I finished high school. At 16 years of age, I looked up and there was me and 39 boys in an engineering class in IIT in India. I knew that I was extremely aggressive and assertive. I tried to tone down the aggressive but keep the assertive because that helped me survive from being so different from everybody else. But I had to be aware of that to manage that distinguishing marker. And yes, people have called me, they started out, say they would call me a bulldozer because I was so assertive. And then when I was managing people at Texas Instruments, they would say, well, you're the iron hand and the velvet glove. So I thought, okay, my markers are slightly adjusting. So it's just that, it's just an awareness of what it is that is different about you and how you manage that so that it's authentic, but it's still not getting into other people's space or derailing you in STEM success. And then finally, study upon study talks about the fact that if we're resilient, now optimism is not something that we can fake, but if we have optimism, it's kind of helpful for us to go through the steps to being successful. Okay, so that was the distinguishing, the markers and specifically the 5 judgments. I'm assuming that if you weren't familiar with the 5 judgments, that it's going to be kind of similar, but I'm just checking in to see if you're familiar with the other concept, the key concept of the book, which is the diversity 4A. And the diversity 4A, let's see. I'm seeing the poll. Okay, so most of you are not familiar with the diversity 4A. I'll give a quick overview. I'm thinking I'll speak for about 10 more minutes before I open it up. So we'll have at least 45 minutes or more for open discussion. So let me go ahead now with the diversity 4A. Thank you for your candor. That helps us a lot. The word foray, if you look at it in the dictionary, the word foray is a journey into unknown territory. What I love about this diversity work is the fact that we never know where we are stepping into. That makes it exciting. It makes it challenging also. But what is life without a little bit of a challenge? And so it's really a question of when we take a foray, the foray is this exploration that we'll make. Also, I kind of like messing with words. I love acronyms. And when I was talking about this global toolkit, I wanted to put together a toolkit of global do's and don'ts that will help us to work smoothly with people of different cultures. And each of those words, ask, accept, adapt, and appreciate, happen to start with the letter A for apple. And so I said 4 A's. That sounds like a foray, which happens to be an exploration. So that's kind of how the foray came about. And so I'm hoping that we will take a diversity foray together. And I'm guessing that all of you who are muted, I can't see your faces and I can't hear you, but I hope you're vigorously nodding. Okay? So I'll give you a second to nod vigorously and let's go ahead and get started. Okay. The Diversity Foray is a practical global toolkit and it applies in the classroom. It applies when our kids then become young adults and our young adults then become working professionals and they go into the workplace. It's very general. I tried to make it universal and so it will apply across diversity situations. But the first thing, the most important thing is to know how to ask the question that helps remove the gap between the us versus them, between the mainstream person and the person who is from the underrepresented group. There's a term that I use, which is singularity dynamics. It talks about how you feel when you are singled out, when you are the only or one of a few group of the people in that population. In the example I gave at the age of 16, when I was the only female in a group of male students in engineering school, that is the singularity dynamic. And the interesting thing is that people say that, and Catalyst, many groups have done studies, if you feel that you're representing a group or you're the only or one of the few people in the group, there are often two extreme effects that happen. One effect that happens is you try to pretend you're not in the group. So what does that mean? You camouflage the fact that you even belong to that group. We see a lot of female executives in corporate America or all over the world. Actually, I've worked in corporate Europe or corporate Asia. We see the same dynamic where they almost act like one of the guys. They dress in very almost man-like tailored business suits. They totally try not to act like a female in order to try and fit in because they are very different. And then the other extreme of the singularity dynamic, when you feel like you're one of the few people, it's then that you start feeling like you represent that group to such an extent that you're super defensive about what you see as being a slight. Or if anyone says anything about females, you're sort of so ultra feminist, you start jumping up and saying, in that same example, well, men are bad too, and that kind of thing. I give that groundwork because really there's a happy medium in the middle where you're aware of being different, you value your uniqueness, but you're also able to adjust to the mainstream. And the best way to do that is use these 4 tools. And the first one is ask. And within ask, there's a way that you ask so you get the information without hurting the feelings of somebody else. I do know that we are in a super politically correct world and people are scared of asking questions. And so if our questions, there's another acronym, if we can be astute, and if we can be strong, and if we can be kind when we're asking the questions, we're more likely to be successful. The next part of this, there's a circle. We accept that there are some things about different cultures that we may not like, but this is just the way that it is. We're not going to change the views of millions of people. There are certain things that we sort of have to agree to disagree about. That's the accept. The next piece of it is adapt. Where possible, we adapt. Just as we adapt when we have someone in the classroom who is hearing impaired, we adapt when we do our tests and we have someone read it out to them, or someone who is visually impaired, we adapt to them. So also, if we can adapt to the needs of people in our classroom without it disrupting everybody else, if we can adapt, that is hugely helpful. And the final thing is when we can just appreciate someone for being different. So I remember I was teaching statistical process control to a group of engineers when I was working many years ago. And a young engineer came to me and he said, I hate statistical process control. And it was a 16-hour class, so it was 2 8-hour sessions. And he said, but I love to hear you speak. And because of that, I'm able to learn more statistical process control. And I just remember that as just being such a pure compliment. And I just loved the way he appreciated something that was different in me. So I just really appreciated that. So that's the diversity foray. And then inside that is a list of don'ts, which is do not space out. That's an acronym for don't shun people, don't patronize, don't assume you know things about them, don't crumble, and do not escalate. Very, very important. Do not escalate, because that's when you have the us versus them. And of course, all this is in the context of assessing ourselves. And so when we look at assessing ourselves, assessing the brand or the personal presence of ourselves and our students, being aware of our own biases and of our own hidden beliefs. Now, I did hear a little bit of pinging and different sounds, so it's possible one of you accidentally unmuted. Not a big deal. If you don't mind muting it back again, that would be awesome. And then with that, when we summarize, these are the concepts we spoke about. I spoke about singularity, which means feeling singled out, because I'm one of the few in that dimension, whether it's gender or culture, versus being part of the mainstream, where I'm comfortable, I'm part of the majority population. I spoke about the diversity foray. I spoke about the don'ts of the diversity foray. I'm repeating that there. And then, of course, the 5 judgments, which is how we look at stereotypes and biases and how they impact someone's effectiveness or how well they do in STEM careers. Specifically, they're distinguishing markers. And so now, as I get to the summary, there are really 3 key points I'd like for us to get out of this discussion. Well, of course, the super point is I'd love for those of you that haven't read the book to read it. That's my self-serving bias coming in. But in addition to that, I really do believe that this message will help people in STEM careers. Leveraging diversity, I think, it's not even like a nice to have. I think it's non-negotiable. I think we're in a global world, and so if we want to have better STEM success for females and underrepresented groups, it's just important for us to be able to use diversity as something we're just competent at. And by the way, if we understand and manage the 5 judgments and use the diversity foray, this helps all of our students be successful. Whether they are in the majority population or diverse, it helps everyone. So that's one of the key points. The second key takeaway is that the 2 main original concepts or judgments, I'm reminding you, I'm recapping. We know that in order to have something move from the short-term memory to long-term memory, we need to repeat it 6 times. I think this might be the 6th time I repeated 5 judgments and diversity foray. These are the 2 original concepts. And then the final point is that sometimes we feel like there's so much information, I'm overwhelmed. So if there is one specific small step that you are aware of or you can start doing in terms of being aware of your 5 judgments and how that may impact you and your interactions with people who are different in the classroom or when you're counseling them or when you're in the state agency. And then the other piece is if we can help spread the word so that our diverse populations, our diverse students can also improve resilience when they are treated, when they are marginalized, when they're not treated well, and they can appreciate it when someone actually values their differences, that helps them be more successful and confident. So those are the key points. And so we're not going to actually do this activity, but I wanted you to make a note of this. When I speak in conferences, all over, this is one of the activities I really try to have, which is for us to be self-aware. Remember, we spoke about emotional intelligence starts with our self-awareness. So just a simple thing, what are my 3 distinguishing markers? Are they positive? Are they negative? Or are they neutral? How do they help me in my STEM career or in my state agency or in my role? And then think of a particular student or person that you interact with and try and do the 5 judgments in terms of how you consciously or unconsciously or others may judge them, and what of today's learning will help that specific person be more successful in STEM. So that, I think, is kind of, I'm just going to keep that slide up for a minute so that you can get a chance to kind of think about it. And then we're coming to the end of me talking. What you don't see, but is hidden, is that I have a hot cup of tea and cough drops all around. I've been talking more than usual, and Barnes & Noble picked up the book, and so we're just launching the National Book Tour on Saturday and have to speak there as well. So I'm actually very relieved that now I stop speaking and I get to hear your voices and how the book, those of you that read the book, if it's had an impact on you, those of you that got familiar with the ideas through this book club, how perhaps this might be relevant for you. Did I answer your questions? There is a toolkit. I think that was one of the questions at the beginning. There is a toolkit of do's and don'ts around behaviors for international, it wasn't particularly students, international people. There is a whole chapter which talks about dress code, understanding the culture you're in, how, speaking, just there's a whole chapter around that. So yes, that is one of the pieces in the book. With that, I think I'm going to hand this over to Freda, Megan, and Greg, and end with a quote, is that it's not enough to have this vision of helping the world through multicultural competence. It is not enough to stare up the steps and say, one day I'm going to do something. We have to start stepping up the stairs. So with that, thank you so much for being here. And Freda, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Debjani. I always learn quite a bit, even though I've heard you speak about this before, so I appreciate thinking through them again. It's time for questions and discussion, and mostly we're wanting to discuss, and I want to tell everyone that this is an experiment, so we'll see how things work. What we'd like to do is that if you look at the menu along the top, you'll see that there's, you go to the speaker, the audio, the cam, and then you see a little person with their hand up. If you would like to speak, you can raise your hand, and then we can call on you. And what would happen is that if you're on the phone line, you can use *6 to unmute yourself and speak. If you're on the computer, then you can go to the microphone that is the second icon there at the top menu, and you can unmute yourself there so that you're able to speak. Now, I don't know if some of you have the cameras and want to try showing yourself when you talk, then we can give that a try. If it's too time consuming, then we won't do it. But here we go. So we can begin. We can also use the chat function, but let's see. Yes, I can see people on the left-hand side if they want to raise their hand. And one of the things I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go back a few slides, because I think that it might be helpful to just leave up these original concepts in case someone wants to refer to them. Oh, Ben is telling me that the S sounds are whistling. Maybe I'm too loud. Thanks, Ben. Are we going to have some discussion? Someone would like to start? I can see someone is typing.
Freda, Lynn raised her hand.
Oh, Lynn did. Okay, Lynn, do you want to unmute and begin to speak?
She may be on the phone too. Lynn, you have the floor.
Lynn, can you go? I can't hear you. Oh, there, maybe. I can see that Lynn is typing. Lynn, are you on the phone or on the computer? That might help also. Greg can help us figure out what to do to get to hear you.
While we're doing that, can you hear me?
I can.
While we're doing that, there's a point that was typed in, which is, I think, important for us to talk about. It's important to note that just because someone appears to not subscribe to traditional gender roles, it doesn't mean that they are trying to blend in. It could be their choice. And that is an excellent point. The whole idea behind knowing the 5 judgments of diversity foray is to have a choice. There are many times when I will specifically, and of course I'm a bit bold as a person, I will make a controversial non-traditional gender statement but that's my choice. I think that's the whole point of it, is to know our presence and then decide whether we want to blend in or be different. Great point, Megan. Oh, and Victor, go ahead.
I can see that. Go ahead. But I can see that Victor has indicated one of the concepts that he was particularly thought was insightful, and I don't know if you'd like Victor to talk a little bit about that. Maybe you can see if you can unmute your microphone and then share with us why you felt it was insightful, and maybe why educators need this particular theory. We've got multiple people typing. Okay, Victor, can we hear you? Try speaking.
And I have a bold suggestion to make, since we're not able to hear different people. How about if as a group we agree that we don't mind disturbances and unmute everyone just so that we can try and get a discussion? What do you think?
Greg, let's give it a try.
Okay, the other thing to remind people is once they get the microphone, they have to click on it. It'll appear gray in the top of their screen. They have to click on it to turn it on. There, everyone has microphone rights. Now, if they're on the phone, that's different. They still can raise their hand, and they'll have to *6 and then speak.
Lynn, Victor, you want to give it a shot? See if we can hear you now?
Okay, and I can see that if, Ben, do you want to try? Let's test yours.
Yes.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Talk just a little bit louder.
Okay.
Yes.
So Debjani, this is such a treat. I've really enjoyed reading the book, and I am excited about your summary that you just provided us, and I really think that many of the concepts would be really useful in the work that we're doing in NAEP. So I'm very excited to think about that down the road. But one of the things that really jumped out at me that was not a slide that was in today's discussion that might be useful to people, especially those who haven't read the book, is the comparative work product of candidates A and B that was in the beginning of the book as illustrations of how the 5 judgments can affect productivity in a work environment when one weights things that are superficial over things that are much more substantive. And I wonder if you might relate that. You may have a slide, but if you can kind of describe it in the context of the 5 judgments, I found that really, really helpful and insightful.
Thank you very much, Ben. So what Ben is referring to is actually almost a full chapter in the book. I wanted to illustrate, and of course the engineer in me cannot work without spider webs and diagrams and things like that. So really he's talking about a spider web diagram on a scale of 1 to 10. If you can imagine that, and I think one of you asked, how to order the book. Yes, it is on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and there are book signings everywhere, so it's very easy. We can help that. But one of the things is on Amazon, there's something called a free look inside. So, you can also look at that. I'm hoping that would be on the way to buying the book, but so that's the way you can look into it. You can imagine that there are 5 different factors. Like, remember, we started with reputational currency, physical impact, etc. So imagine a diagram of spiderweb with all of those. So let's say that 2 people are trying to get into a very prestigious college for a really good STEM career. There are 2 candidates, and candidate 1 and candidate 2. Well, candidate 1 comes from the mainstream, so they have a better reputational currency for whatever reason. Candidate 1 has a better physical impact because they, attractive looking, and they dress really well, and they have a smart purse when they, if it's a female, walks in with a smart purse and great shoes and speaks really well, has no accent or has a great command of the language. And so as you go through the different judgments, even if the first candidate may not be the best fit for that particular, whether it's a position in a university, whether it's a job, whatever that it is, that's, let's say, on a scale of 10, candidate 1 maybe has 4 out of 10 in terms of the actual product, work product or output. Candidate 2 comes in. Candidate 2 is, let's say, from a particular country in Asia where they value someone with less eye contact. The person looks down, doesn't speak much, is mild-mannered, maybe has a little bit of a language issue. If you look at the reputational currency, you look at the physical impact, look at all the first 3 or 4 judgments, the second candidate may be very low in those pieces. So the person, the interviewer or the professor, or whoever's making the final say about which person to select, ends up selecting the person who looks and sounds good, but may not be such a good fit for that particular role, because of all the judgments and stereotypical biases that they made right at the beginning. I'm very glad that worked for you, Ben. To be honest, whenever I show that spider web, the diagram, it's kind of a challenge because within 45 minutes, it's hard to know which of, out of a 220-page book, what to fit in. But I think you gave me some good feedback that maybe next time I should just have a picture of that spider web. Thank you. I'm glad that helped for you. Freda, some of the other comments?
Okay. Well, before I go to those, Victor believes he has his microphone ready, and so let's see if we can hear Victor. Go ahead, Victor.
Great. The point that was the discussion of those two candidates, I thought that was, to me, I've seen that play out in a classroom multiple times, and kind of going back to the Johari window, when we're aware of those things that are even hidden about ourselves, then we could probably more effectively reach those students and not judge them based on whatever they're presenting in the room. I don't know, the interviewing piece or the scenario that we're discussing, it just seems so real in the classroom
Thank
from
you,
my own
Victor.
personal experience. So.
Thank you so much. And I
Thanks
so
for sharing
appreciate
that.
you reading the
Thank
book
you.
and the comments you've typed in as well. I will say that a lot of the examples, these frameworks came from things that people like you, participants, have actually shared with me. And I've taken out the names for confidentiality, but a lot of the frameworks are based on real life examples put together in a framework. So I'm glad you found that so real.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. And I'm going to read Lynn's now, her comment. She said, distinguishing markers. Some bias gets perpetuated if we ascribe weight to them without critically filtering who is describing. Filtering. Who is describing or assigning the markers? And then she says yes with a question mark.
Let me give you an example of that, Lynn. A distinguishing marker is a snapshot in time, right? So I was facilitating a session where it was executives a few weeks ago, and it was 2 months ago, there were 2 women and there was a group of men. And the argument and discussion got very heated, and one of the men made the comment, "Oh, I'm surprised we're getting so emotional. There are only 2 women in the room." Okay? They made an assumption that the distinguishing marker of every woman is that they're emotional. And by emotions, they didn't mean emotions of resilience and assertiveness. They meant emotions of tears and crying and making a scene. Okay? So when we talk about distinguishing markers, your point is excellent. It's good to know what people think are our distinguishing markers, because we can dispel the myth if that distinguishing marker is completely inaccurate because of their biases and their stereotypical thoughts. So it is an excellent point that distinguishing markers may be real or not. It's kind of Berger and Luckman, they have this excellent paper. It's called The Social Construction of Reality. And really that has to do with the idea that people think that they know something, and because they think it, in their minds it makes it so. So yes, absolutely be astute when you're looking at your own distinguishing markers. That's one piece of it. And then the other thing is, as Victor mentioned, let's leverage the Johari window. Sometimes we have blind spots about our own distinguishing markers. So it's kind of managing that as well.
Thank you. Lynn is just saying, very helpful response. I so appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you. So thank you, Lynn. The next thing that I would like to read is from Kathy, and it says, would you say more about the impacts of low versus high cultural competency? With low cultural competency, we may see some loss of resilience. With high cultural competency, we may see an increase in effort. What other impacts have been found related to the levels of cultural competency?
Excellent question, Kathy. So there's really 3 areas, and those of you, I think Victor, Ben, several, Sandra, many of you have read the book, are very familiar with the book. You notice in the preface section, I actually talk about that. I kind of highlight that. I think it's in the Look Inside piece on Amazon as well. But there are 3 reasons why we want to have better cultural competency. And I always start with the one that's linked to my mission, which is learning, helping, teaching with graceful, flawed authenticity. The first reason we want to be culturally competent is because it is the right thing to do. It has nothing, even before we talk about business and STEM and other success, it is the right thing to do to treat people with respect, to not make them feel small, to make them feel valuable, even especially when they think and behave differently from us. So to me, that's just right there the umbrella reason why it's important to be culturally competent. Within that, the next reason is, have you thought of a time where someone made you feel very special and very different, and they valued you being different? I'm really, Megan, I'm going to embarrass you a little bit, but every time I do a session with Megan, or I do a session with someone like Ben, they highlight what is different about me, and because of that, I would literally, I mean, don't hold me to it, but I would do much more than half of the work when I'm working with you because of the way you value me. And that's cultural competence. That is appreciating someone for being different, and then you get much more discretionary effort from them. And then the third piece is, when someone makes you feel small and devalued, you are a hostage. You are a prisoner in that situation. You sit in the classroom, you sit in the workplace, and you say, I'll show them. And the way you show them is you do just enough to not be fired or not be removed from the classroom, but you don't put in any extra effort. And then when you go outside, you also sort of badmouth the curriculum or the professor or whatever else it is. When we feel marginalized, it sort of brings out the meaner side of us, and we try and in some way derail or undermine the person who made us feel small. So those are the three reasons why it's really important. People think this is just a soft, touchy-feely, kumbaya, let's all be friends. No, there is an actual reason for being culturally competent, and it's really important.
Thank you. I have another comment that has come from Jeanette. I'm curious about others' ideas on how we might go about doing what Ben suggests above. We also need to create safe spaces for people to ask and discover their own ignorance, especially if you're not the leader. So do you have some insight for us on that,
Jeanette,
Debjani?
that you're curious about others' ideas, because how about if other people, and Ben, I think, could you maybe start with, you've mentioned ouches being a technique, and then just anybody else, even people we haven't heard from, what are the ideas? I just love to learn from your ideas. So can we open it up? What other ideas does everyone else have?
Ben is typing, but Ben, can you also turn on your mic and talk? And then maybe we can hear from some others. Oh, you want to hear from others first. Okay, somebody out there, I need some others to talk.
I'm a patient woman.
Kathy's typing.
You're welcome, Kathy. And we are patient women. We're fine with silence. So if there's 30 seconds of silence while you're collecting your thoughts, so be it.
Yes, and also it's okay to try the mics. This is an experiment. We know it is, and so we're willing to try and work with you to get the mics on. And I know that 2 people have figured it out, so maybe some others would like to try.
I think my mic may be on. I'm not for sure.
Yes, it is. Is that
if
Victor?
you all can hear me, but
Okay.
yeah, this is Victor. It would seem, I think that's a really good question as far as trying to solicit feedback from the group on how we would approach that. But the first step would obviously be making sure that safe space is created. And there's a certain level of groundwork that has to be done prior to having difficult conversations like that, I think. So maybe setting those ground rules with the group, I guess, would be the first step that I would suggest.
I know that I have, Victor, done that before in groups, and it is, I think, one of the first steps is to get the group to decide how they create their own safe space. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else want to test their microphone? Lynn is saying, this connects to my question about shortcuts, even as simple as which holidays are the important ones to different cultures, which of our students are fasting, etc. Perhaps the simplest thing is to ask the class.
If there are two things I would want you to walk away with from the book, one would be the importance of asking, and the second would be understanding your distinguishing markers. I think there are many other important things, don't get me wrong, but I really think we don't ask enough, because we love to talk. I'm the first one most guilty of that. We don't listen well. And listening and asking is really a key in diversity work.
Yes, and I know Ben wants to talk, but I will share that the first year I taught, I had an 8th grade class, and the girls that were in it were all from underrepresented or underprivileged homes and cultures and homes, and I wanted us to talk about something, and they would not talk until one of them made it very clear that I did not have any authority to talk or to share, and that they knew more than I did. And at that point, I learned a lot, and we had a wonderful discussion for the next 3 days. So, yeah, I would agree. Let's see, Ben, do you want to talk now? You're on.
I'm going to try to articulate this thought as clearly as I can, but we just had a similar book club to this one, and I really love this format, but it was looking at Claude Steele's book, Whistling Vivaldi, which focuses on stereotype threat. And one of the things that really resonated with me and is resonating in the context of the conversation around having courageous conversations and creating a safe space to discover one's own ignorance is Claude Steele's work around looking at stereotype threat for white males and females in situations in which they're interacting with, in particular, he looked at African American males and females in a professional environment or even in just an environment of happenstance. And that the stereotype threat that's in place is for many white people, there's a fear of being judged as racist because of lack of knowledge or understanding or ignorance. Therefore, there's a natural avoidance of intercultural, cross-ethnic, whatever you want to call it, contact. But what he found as the most powerful way to reduce the stereotype threat was to just simply say this interaction was a learning experience, that it was in a place where people could learn from one another. And so I think what that leads me to think about is how do we create a space where we can learn from each other and not be fearful of stumbling on our own ignorance in offending somebody inadvertently and have to then face that stereotype threat right in the face, especially if you're a white person, which I am. And so I just think that's a really interesting intersection of stereotype threat as a theory and the research around that and the work of yours, Debjani.
Yes. Well, thank you, Ben. And I wanted to combine that with an excellent point that Megan also has made when she was typing, is that a lot of times when we are in that sort of gray space where it appears that people who are in the mainstream population, as you said, a Caucasian male, a white male, sometimes may find, because it's really hard sometimes because people might misunderstand the way the question is, the suggestion that Megan had, which is sometimes when we ask about things which might be sensitive, going one-on-one versus in the group makes it much, much safer. When we do diversity work together in NAEP and STEM and in other areas, one of the things that I do is referenced by someone else, which just has to do with the ground rules. And in the ground rules, I often will ask for permission to be just very real and authentic. And I will say that if inadvertently I somehow stepped on your toes, I apologize up front, but it is not from intent. Really, the difference that is in our professional development, the impact versus intent, that is a huge piece of it. So I really like that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is one of the tools, sometimes you have to decide how much energy you want to use when you do inadvertently offend someone or you are offended yourself. And one of the really important tools we find is for somebody who is not the diverse person to speak up for them in a group setting. And so in the example I gave about the man speaking about, two women, emotional, etc., if one other male in that situation had said, ouch, not even a huge speech about, women and this and that, but just said, ouch, that kind of, we try to interrupt the cycle when it happens and just observe that something has happened which some person, it's landed wrong on one person, and then see what to do. Wow, there's some excellent questions. I see a question from Rosemary Smith and Jocelyn Riley is agreeing.
Well, yes, and before I take Rosemary's, Kathy Johnson has raised her hand. I think she's going to try to speak on her mic. So Kathy, you're on. Let's see how we do, and then we'll come back to Rosemary's
So can you hear me on the
comment.
telephone? Okay. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Well, thank you, Debjani. I've
Yes, ma'am.
appreciated listening to this, and I'm going back sort of in the flow of this conversation that's happening now, and you made this statement earlier about how easy it is to make people feel appreciated relative to how easy it is also to make people feel marginalized. And you spoke to the orchid effect, which can lead to a huge jump in effort. And I'd love to hear you speak a little bit more about this, what can feel like a real tightrope for some people about wanting to do something positive and then sort of having these unintentional consequences where someone feels singled out instead of feeling appreciated. And what kinds of things have you found really can help somebody who's on the nervous end of that? What kind of guidance can we offer?
That's a great question, Kathy. I really like storytelling, the power of storytelling in these situations. What I mean by that is, let's take a student comes into our classroom. The student is shy and doesn't participate much, but you notice that the student is able to answer a lot of things. You may fill in a lot of reasons why this is happening, and then you may want to ask, but you're not really sure how to ask questions, pointed questions about where the student's coming from. If you ask the student, once you build up some trust, you ask a person to share their story with you, you get so many cues. And then within that, the way to ask, if you can ask a softer question versus the very, it's not like in quality control in audits, we used to say, well, why is that? Why is that? Why is that? And you sort of interrogate the person. There are softer ways to say, that's so interesting. Tell me more. Could you give me an example of that? The more open-ended, and it's so important, the emotional intelligence is being aware of our presence. So somebody in my family frowns like this every time they talk. And, their intent is really positive. But when they frown like that and say, well, why did you say that? I can tell you, I don't want to answer. So being so aware, I take a deep breath, I relax, I smile, I sort of do my dentist proud and let them see my teeth. I'm kidding, but it's humor, it's relaxing into the discomfort. Sheryl Sandberg, she talks about leaning into the discomfort. Yes, leaning into the discomfort, but not letting your body language be so uncomfortable because discomfort is contagious. And so relaxing, breathing, asking softer, open questions, and also saying, the reason I'm asking is I really want to know. Let me know if this question makes you uncomfortable. It's perfectly okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's look at Rosemary's comment or questions. What is your take on code switching? Do you see this as an adaptation by the underrepresented culture, or do you see this as a cop-out or a way of giving into the mainstream?
Rosemary, could you explain what you mean by code switching? I don't think I understood that very well.
And Rosemary, are you able to turn on your mic or use the mic? think she's typing.
Now you might notice.
I'm just going to read some of the
well,
other comments while she's
I'm just
typing.
making a comment, Freda.
Okay.
There is this moment, right, where Rosemary is typing and there is silence. When we talk about diversity, be very aware of diversity in styles. I am actually very comfortable with silence, and it's perfectly okay for me for 30 seconds to wait while Rosemary types. There are some of you that may get impatient, and I'm not talking about you, Fred, I'm talking about people on the call. There are some of you that may get impatient. My hypothesis, I don't know that it's right or wrong, is that when we talk to people about subjects as important as this, with a sort of, if we signal to them non-verbally that we have a clock in our head and we have 2 minutes to talk to them, or else we have to move on, I think that maybe is a very powerful non-verbal. So I just want to approach that and ask you that question, is when you ask, do you ask because there's an answer you want within a minute, or do you have 10 minutes to let them process, especially if their style is different from yours? That is also a diversity technique or two.
Okay, I think you can see that Rosemary said an example would be an African American drops slang when speaking with his or her supervisor.
Yep. You know, it's so interesting. We don't know what is inside someone's head. So Tegwin Pulley, who's our director of NAEP in Texas and who's my diversity mentor, who's one of the reasons I'm in diversity. So you might say the book, one of the reasons that there is a book is because of things Tegwin did many years ago. One of the things she asks, and she got from someone else, is what else might be true. So since I can't see in someone's head, I'm not sure, but I would ask the question, what else might be true? What do I mean by that? I don't know. First of all, I don't know the supervisor's cultural background. I do not know. The questions I would start asking is that, has there been a prior discussion with the supervisor where that might be okay? I had a boss where she and I had a very close relationship, and she would actually try out different terms from my culture because I'd given her permission to do so. So in other words, I don't know what else might be true. I think, Rosemary, from your example, you're saying there's no background or context, and suddenly someone starts using slang from their culture when speaking with their supervisor. I think your assumption is also the supervisor is not African American. I think these are the assumptions from your question. Is that correct? Okay, good. So what is your take on that? Is that a negative or a neutral or a positive, this example?
After Rosemary gets through typing, we have Penny who would like to speak.
While Rosemary is typing, I do want to say, as someone who's been losing my voice, that we so take for granted the ability to be able to speak. I mean, we're temporarily handicapped because some of us don't have mics. We just take it so much for granted. Okay, so in this case, what you're thinking, or if I understood, I'm paraphrasing, I may be accurate or inaccurate, is that the person, let's call that person Bob, drops slang, and the supervisor, I'm going to assume a male supervisor called Ted. Okay, so supervisor is Ted and Bob is the person who's dropping the slang. Well, and you're thinking this is not very effective. If I'm the supervisor, I think what's very, very critical is for us to understand the reason why Bob is doing this. For Ted to understand how uncomfortable or comfortable Ted feels in this circumstance, how comfortable the supervisor feels, And then really the first piece of the diversity foray is to ask. And one of the books, I've been so lucky, I've heard wonderful speakers. I heard Joseph Grenny, the author of Crucial Conversations, and he actually came and I heard him speaking, and he said, well, one of the first straightforward things would be to ask. So for Ted, the supervisor, to say, hey, Bob, I noticed that normally you speak a certain way and you just shared, these expressions with me. Tell me more about that. Or, I don't think I've heard that. What does that mean? Calling it without any huge judgments. Hey, Bob, you're using, and using labels, I think is very, very risky. The stronger the label, the more defensive the person is going to get. I, I really, it's a multivariate analysis. Sorry, I have to do the engineering statistical description, but it is a multivariate analysis. And the first variable is the level of trust between the two people. The second variable is what else might be true. So in other words, did Ted, the supervisor, just shout at Bob about something to do with his ethnicity or background? I'd need to know a lot of context. But I think the main objective is to make sure it's a discussion between Bob and Ted and not a discussion between African Americans as a group and Caucasians as a group, or men versus women, or this group versus that group. Because when it becomes an us versus them, then you have to be very careful. I would also like to point out the slide that's up there, the fourth of the don't space out, where you look at crumble. Crumble has to do with when some people use being different as a race card. Don't crumble under that pressure. So that I think applies to your question as well, Rosemary. If you believe that Bob, for whatever reason, is using the race card, then absolutely we would explore that. But that would be probably my 10th or 11th assumption before going through all the other assumptions and asking questions. And then having a person-to-person conversation versus a group-to-group stereotypical assumption. Did that help?
Thank you, Debjani. I'm going to read Rosemary's response, and then I'm going to let Penny talk, and then we'll move to conclusion so that I can do the ending part of our slides. Rosemary says, I think code switching is natural. It is a useful tool and can move people ahead in business. However, I feel it's sad that folks still feel the need to do this due to discrimination.
You are correct.
And Ben has said neutral, and I'm going to go back up and read one or two other things up here. But Penny, you're on now, so will you please go ahead and speak?
While Penny is getting ready to speak, I just want to say one thing. Rosemary, I applaud your courage in asking that question. The only way we make true strides in diversity is if we are in a safe and open environment to ask the question that other people think about, and you are the one who asks. That, we talked about safe space. I really appreciate that this seems to be a safe space for all the questions you've been asking. Just want to say that.
Penny, do you want to give it a try? Okay, Penny's typing and Ben's typing. I did want to go back and get into the recording, though. Two comments that were made. One by Jocelyn said, especially in a group where the minority person is highly outnumbered, it is very uncomfortable to be singled out. And also she commented that a minority person should not be the only person in the room invested in equity. So just wanted to get those into the record, the recording. And Penny's saying that now she's needing to type. So she's typing her information in.
I'm sorry, Penny. Did I say that again? No, is it too late to open the discussion? No. We have plenty of time, Penny. Please, I'm so sorry that I stepped in and said something just when you were speaking.
Penny, would you like to type your information in? Okay, well, thank you so much. I will move forward then with the slides. Let me get to where we want to be. I'm going to go back to presentation style. I would like to just remind people that NAEP has products and services available to assist you with your programs. And one, we have professional development like today, and other types of professional development. We have a PDI in April in Washington, D.C. area. We have customized webinars that we can do if you need specific topics covered for your population or your audience. We have, wait a minute, somebody has taken away my slides. I'm going back, okay, to my presentation here. Is it having to reload, Greg, all the way?
Yeah, it should be back up in a second.
Okay. We have career toolkits that have to do with counseling. We also have some posters and items that are infographic wall art. We also have some consulting services. So please take advantage of those or inquire if you need more information. I want to thank our presenters and our team, Debjani. Once again, it was just insightful, and I felt like we had good discussion. I thank Greg for all that he does behind the scenes, and also Megan today. I'd like to invite you to join our virtual learning community and view the archive webinars at the www.stemequitypipeline.org. And I just want to thank everyone for participating in this complimentary webinar. We couldn't do it without you all, so thank you for showing up. I want to encourage you to complete the certificate of completion. The survey that's going to pop up on the screen, and at the end of it there is a certificate of completion, and you'll be able to download or to print a PDF file, and then you can enter your name, and then you have that. It will not be sent from our national office this time, but you can get it immediately. So let's see, Greg, do you want to pop that one up?
Okay.
Thank you.
Actually, that's the old one. I apologize.
Our web is up in the left-hand pod.
Must have it in a different.
Okay, yes. Debjani?
I just want to say thank you to all of you. It was a great discussion, and I so appreciate your being here.
Well, and you can see over in our chat function, it's just saying, I will read some of these. Definitely want to hear your thoughts. Oh, Debjani was there. Let's see, Debjani and Freda, that was fabulous. Thank you so much. Debjani, I learned so much from you every time we work together. Thank you. Rosemary has said, thank you. I look forward to reading your book. Thank you so much from Kathy. And Megan is reminding people to download the handout. It includes the frameworks if you want to be reminded of those. Anyway, it's been a great webinar, virtual book club today.
I have a question.
Appreciate everyone's efforts and those of you that are.
And just to remind everyone that the archive of this webinar will be available probably starting
Your
tomorrow on the
specific
STEM Equity
needs
Pipeline
and your
website.
interests.
Thank you.